What is up, Pitt fans? Thank you so much for joining us on another edition of the PG Pitt Show. I'm Stephen Thompson. That's Abby Schnable. We cover Pitt athletics for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We are laboring on a Labor Day. Happy Labor Day, wherever you are joining us. Happy September, too. Pat Narduzzi said it after Saturday's game against Duquesne, after the Panthers won 61-9 over the Dukes, that this is kind of the preseason. But August is over. September now hits, and things start to get a little bit more real for the Panthers. Abby, how are you feeling today?
I mean, it's good to see that Pitt was able to go out there and just absolutely do what they needed to do. Yeah, there were some kinks and errors there in the mix, but it was a phenomenal weekend of college football.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. A lot of big things happening around the rest of the ACC. I would argue maybe the story of the weekend was the ACC's performance in the non conference schedule and some of those big helmet games. But before we get into that, we have a message from our friends over at ZipRecruiter. Are you having trouble finding the right people to hire? Tired of sorting through endless resumes? Well, the future of hiring looks much brighter because ZipRecruiter's latest tools and features help speed up the finding of the right people for your roles. So save your valuable time. And now you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/audio. With ZipRecruiter's new advances, you can easily find and connect with qualified candidates in minutes. See a candidate you're really interested in? You can unlock their contact info instantly. Use ZipRecruiter and save your time when hiring. 4 to 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. And if you go to ziprecruiter.com/audio, right now you can try it for free. Again, that's ziprecruiter.com/audio. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Abby, it was I would call it a lively press conference today with Pat Narduzzi to kick off Central Michigan week. Maybe more lively than you would expect after a 61-9 victory the week prior. We talked a little bit of injuries. Pat Narduzzi doesn't love to do that, but why don't you start us off with talking about arguably the biggest one, the biggest name that we had to follow this week when we're talking about injuries from that Duquesne game.
Yeah, I mean, everyone saw Ryan Baer, offensive lineman Ryan Baer, kind of go down on the field, holding his shoulder a little bit. He went back in, or he didn't even come off the field. He did the next rep, and then we didn't see him again the rest of the game. We saw the shoulder wrapped up, but we very briefly asked Pat Narduzzi what the status was. And again, like Steven said, he doesn't love talking about injuries, but he said it was just a stinger and that he'd be fine, which is good. Good news, because this offensive line needs the continuity of a Ryan Baer, especially because we saw, their sixth offensive lineman, Kendall Stanley, enter in at that right tackle spot, and it wasn't the cleanest performance from him. I mean, Steven, what did you see from Stanley?
Yeah, I saw Kendall Stanley give up the cleanest sack that I've ever seen on his first rep at right tackle, and Pat Narduzzi took some of the blame for that. He said it's not entirely on Stanley. Stanley hadn't played any right tackle before, but this is maybe my problem with some of the way Pitt uses their offensive linemen. I can totally understand wanting to cross-train guys, get them in different positions in case of an emergency, but Kendall Stanley did not play any right tackle at all during training camp, at least that we saw. So I just don't understand really throwing him out there in that scenario. I get it's Duquesne, but again, it's just not a natural position for him. I think I would prefer that, a guy like Stanley, stand by for a left tackle job, or, even maybe left guard, if you buy that he was working out there during training camp and was doing well there. I think Pitt probably would have been better served to put Giovanni Cooley, who's listed as the true backup at right tackle, in there. But Narduzzi said that the sack was ugly, but Stanley got better as the game went on and played a lot better outside of that first rep. I'm not sure I necessarily saw that. I'm not worried about Ryan Baer's injury. I think he'll play next week. Like I said, he stayed in the game after that initial,
Mm-hmm.
Pat Narduzzi called it a stinger. He stayed in the game. I think maybe even try to go out there for another drive
Mm-hmm.
as well. So he didn't leave immediately, but sounds like maybe for precautionary reasons, given where the score was at that point in the game, Pitt thought, yeah, this isn't worth it for us to kind of keep throwing Ryan Baer out there and risk a further injury. But Sounds like he's going to play against Central Michigan. Not necessarily that worried. I am, though, worried, I think, about continuing to move guys around the offensive line. I know you want to get your best six out there, but Kendall Stanley did not look like one of your best six when you threw him out there at right tackle because it's a position that he hadn't played before.
No. Yeah, and it's like you said. I mean, I think we talked about it with Kendall Stanley practicing at left guard too during training camp. Is he has only really played that left tackle spot, and while it's great to cross train, it inherently makes you just a little bit weaker at the spots that you're not as used to, and that makes it like a little bit of a liability, especially if injuries come down the line, because they said they moved him to the other side. And you mentioned Giovanni Cooley. He did get in there and he did look pretty decent. At that point, Duquesne had switched to Logan Kushner, so it wasn't their starting quarterback. But I mean, I thought Giovanni Cooley looked better in that spot than Kendall Stanley. So I am very interested about the reasoning of putting Kendall Stanley in that spot when Cooley, they've talked about Cooley, and that's his natural spot.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it doesn't sound like something that they're going to do again, quite honestly. I think they're going to try to focus on keeping guys at natural positions and making sure that they can make those positions work. I mean, I will say that, though, overall, and we were there at the stadium. I rewatched the game on Sunday morning, at least the first three quarters when at least a lot of the starters were in. But I thought the offensive line looked really good. It always comes with the caveat of it was an FCS opponent, it was Duquesne, but I was really encouraged by what I saw. I think particularly running to the left side of the line behind Jeff Percy was really productive for them. Pass protection was obviously really good, and Duquesne, FCS opponent obviously, but has some talented pass rushers, and they were able to keep Eli Holstein upright for really the entire game outside of that one sack that Stanley gave up. So I think a lot of encouraging things from the offensive line, and it's kind of been what we've said all offseason. If they can stay healthy, I have a lot of faith in what this offensive line is able to do and how they're able to optimize Desmond Reed and Eli Holstein, who, this offense, I guess, especially is really built around. It's built to optimize what those two guys can do. And this offensive line certainly did that on Saturday afternoon. I want to get to another part of the injury report, I guess you could call it, from today. Par Narduzzi was asked about Jaeden Moore, defensive end, did not play on Saturday afternoon. We didn't, get an official injury confirmation or, description of what maybe kept him out of that game, but he didn't play. He's someone that the Panthers have talked about all offseason, going way back to spring ball, as someone who's looked good and could be contending for a starting offensive line job. So a little curious that he did not play. We're interested to see maybe if there's more news coming out about that. Par Narduzzi did say it's not a season-ending injury, but that's really all we know at this point. The thing is, Abby, I am much less worried about a Jaeden Moore injury than I am a offensive line or a Ryan Baer injury, because Pitt had a couple guys step up at defensive end.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty stacked at the defensive end spot. Not only did you have Blaine Spires out there as that starter ahead of Jaeden Moore playing with his hand in a cast, but then you had guys like Joey Zelinsky and Zach Crothers really step up and take the opportunity to flash some of their skills, which is huge when you have highly touted guys like Spires, like Jaeden Moore ahead of you in the depth chart. Any opportunity you get, you have to go out there, you have to make a play, and they both did. But Joey Zelinsky actually got one of the sacks, which is huge because he's in company with Kyle Lewis now as one of the only few players, 4 players or 3 players got sacks this weekend to have one, and that's huge. Like any knowing that Joey Zelinsky and Zach Crothers can go in and there's not that big of a drop off is big for continuity and big for if injuries were to happen down the line. And it goes back to what they've been saying last week all through training camp, is that this is one of the deepest and maybe arguably one of the strongest defensive lines Pitt has had in a while. And that's very helpful when you have such a solid defense to kind of be able to bail you out if the offense gets into trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really encouraged by what I saw from Crothers and Zelinsky. Zelinsky is a guy who surprised me a little bit in training camp. I don't think you look at him and see necessarily an athletic freak, but he's got a little bit of twitch to him. He was able to get to the quarterback and make some plays in the backfield. It was encouraging to see, and Crothers kind of the same thing, just a guy with a high motor who was able to get in the backfield, put some pressure on the quarterback, even though he didn't finish off a sack. Those are guys who are going to be a part of the rotation. Even if Jaeden Moore was active on Saturday, I think those guys would have played a lot. And I think the other notable thing is that neither of them played a ton of snaps. I think between them they had 25 total snaps. But they were able to create pressure multiple times. Zelinsky obviously was able to land the sacks. So really encouraging things from that group. At a position where I don't know if outside of Jimmy Scott, we thought that there were many known commodities. I think the team internally was really high on Spires and Zelinsky and Jaeden Moore, but you get a little thinner there and you start to say, okay, someone else has to step up. And Crothers was maybe someone who was flying under the radar, but really, really, really encouraging to see him be able to make some plays in live game action, because that's obviously very different from when you're hearing about them making plays in practice.
Absolutely. I mean, sorry, Finley's my dog is underneath my desk all of a sudden. Anytime you're able to see that depth really be tested, because that's the thing is you never know until you know. And so to see that depth get tested kind of right away and know that they're able to be there without a bit of a drop off is just a good sign for the defensive line, and good sign for Pitt too, because it shows that at least at this position group they know that they have that depth, and who's to say that they don't have that in the other positions that maybe we are less confident about.
Yeah, but we know how important the defensive line and creating pressure is to this Pitt defense. If it's going to operate at its highest level, then you need the pass rush to really be elite, and we think we're going to get that from the defensive line. I mean, Sean Fitzsimmons and Francis Brew were basically living in the Duquesne backfield all day Saturday. So, I'm encouraged by, the defensive tackles I have no worries about, but I think you need some more from that defensive end spot, and Zelinsky and Crothers definitely delivered. Abby, changing gears a little bit, it was a huge weekend outside of Acrisure Stadium, quite honestly. And I would argue, like I said at the top, that the story of this weekend in college football was the ACC. And this is a conference that really did challenge itself in the non-conference schedule. I mean, you look at some of the games, the games that Georgia Tech played, that Florida State bringing Alabama, playing Notre Dame weekend. Clemson always does this, where they play a really quality opponent week one. And, I think the narrative going in was, okay, the ACC has scheduled these games. We love how aggressive they're being, but how would they do in these games? Would they be able to make a statement? And the ACC certainly did. Let me read off some stats from some records from ESPN's David Hale. He compiled these, credit to him. But the ACC, 11-4 overall on opening weekend. They were 7 against FBS competition. They went 3-3 versus Power 4 teams. That's the second best record of any Power 4 conference, behind only the SEC's 4-2. Big 12 went 1-3. Big 10 went 2-1. And this is the one that I think is really the most notable of all of them. The ACC went 2-3 against ranked opponents. No one else in the country, any of the Power 4 conferences, the Group of Five as a collective, and every FCS team that played an FBS opponent, no one had more ranked wins than the ACC's 2. The SEC went 1-1, Big 10 went 1-0, and the Big 12 did not play a ranked opponent collectively. It really all centers around what Florida State did against Miami on Saturday afternoon while we were kind of wrapping up our work from Acrisure Stadium. But I mean, just a massive, massive weekend from the ACC. Abby, what was, I think that Florida State win was huge, but what else did you notice about the ACC in week one?
Yeah, I mean, just to dive into that Florida State one, just real quick, because that is, I think, huge, and just so showing that the ACC can't be slept on, because Florida State was 2-10 last season. For all accounts, no one really thought that they were going to be one of the top teams in the ACC, nevertheless be able to beat a team like Alabama. And so for them to come out of the gates to really, their defense stifled Alabama, really did a lot of work there. And to have that, it shows that it's not just Clemson, it's not just Miami at the top of the ACC. There are more teams at the top that we realize, just because, teams have reloaded, teams want to get better, and that was huge. I think the other one that really stood out, and this was against a lower team, but Virginia, to throw for 264 yards, their quarterback Chandler Morris, like that's big. And then Cam Ross, one of their receivers, had 224 all-purpose yards. Like, those are huge numbers. And yes, that against Coastal Carolina, so not the biggest, but if that's how they're coming out the gate, much like Pitt coming out the gate with the Desmond Reed 88-yard kickoff return, it just gives confidence that the ACC isn't necessarily going to be buried by the SEC and by the Big Ten this year, because look what they did in week 1. And I mean, even Miami edging out Notre Dame, that was a big one. I mean, forcing a turnover on any Notre Dame team is an accomplishment in and of itself. And that really helped them be able to just barely beat out the Fighting Irish. And again, it just sets up the season really nicely. And so hopefully the ACC can keep this pace up and keep their name in the mix, because, there's always that conversation of the SEC and the Big Ten edging everyone out. And so the ACC can keep sneaking some wins like these. I don't think you can have that conversation as much anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I want to get to one of your points about, a Virginia team beating up on Coastal Carolina, who's, a group of 5 team, but I think a quality group of 5 team. I think Cal's kind of in the same bucket. Them beating Oregon State on the road, I believe, by 21 points, really showing something with their true freshman quarterback, who was a former 5-star. He threw the ball all over the yard, looks really special. But like, those top line wins are really important for the ACC, just because, and Clemson missed out on an opportunity to really notch one of those. Virginia Tech was really competitive with South Carolina, but, they end up losing by 2 scores in the end. But, Georgia Tech going and taking care of business at Colorado, that's a helmet game. That's a game on national TV on a Friday night that everyone was watching, that I think everyone had eyeballs on, and they cover the spread. Florida State obviously doing what they did against Alabama as a 14-point underdog. And I think physically imposing their will on an Alabama team. I think that was huge too. I think the way that they won that game was really important. But Miami, again, doing it in a national television spot in a standalone game on that kind of stage, those stages really, really matter. Because I think a lot of the problems with the ACC, there is certainly performance issues. Like, they have to plainly be better on the football field, but also you have to be better in those moments. Like, week 1 really matters. And the ACC was really aggressive about scheduling these games and kind of dominating the primetime spots on Labor Day weekend, those prime television opportunities, and to follow through on them and to come away with wins is just, it's massive for perception, which really matters. It's going to matter in November and December when the selection committee maybe has to decide between a 9-3 SEC team or a 9-3 Big Ten team or a 10-2 ACC team. It's important to take advantage of those opportunities when you have them, not just to kind of be competitive with these teams, but to actually win those games is absolutely massive. And like I said, you can't underrate the fact that Virginia, which had been a bottom feeder for so long, at least like take care of business, to at least look like a team that could compete in this crowded middle of the ACC. Because one of the other things is that bottom of the ACC had been really, really bad. And, Cal, or excuse me, not Cal, I want to say Wake Forest, eking out a 10-9 win over Kennesaw State doesn't exactly help that. It's not as if this conference was without its losses this weekend. Syracuse getting handled by Tennessee down in Atlanta, but showing a little bit of competency at the bottom of the conference, I think, is going to go a long way too. Just kind of that rising tide needs to come for all of the teams in the ACC. But I think the fact that they were able to take advantage of those primetime opportunities, those big marquee helmet games against ranked opponents, opens up something for Pitt. But for the rest of the conference, later in the year, later down the line, if there is a higher level of respect for the ACC that they earned in week one, that they earned in the non-conference stage going into ACC play, then you can start to kind of tell a narrative about the ACC that's very different from one that we've told in the past. It's not just going to be bad teams kind of fighting it out, and then, is Clemson or an SMU or a Miami going to rise to the top? I think it's much more feasible now to think about multiple teams from the ACC making the college football playoff again this year versus where we were at the beginning of the year, where, if there was more than one ACC team in the playoff, that would have really surprised a lot of people in week one. So ACC certainly in a much stronger position after.
Absolutely. I mean, and then I think about, like you mentioned, this could help Pitt. It absolutely could help Pitt, because here's Miami, who's on their schedule at the end of the season, that just squeaked out the win against Notre Dame, who is also on Pitt's schedule later in the season. And if Pitt is able to take care of business in the games that they should, and they enter those last 3 games, with maybe no losses, maybe just one loss, and are able to get a win over a Miami, over a Notre Dame, then their postseason conversation becomes a lot different because of the strength of the ACC that we've seen in week one. And that conversation looks a lot different if Florida State doesn't beat Alabama, if UVA drops their game. I know Pitt isn't.
But if Georgia Tech doesn't really handle Colorado on the road like they did, like that becomes very like when we talked to our friend Shahan on our live stream when we launched this channel, he said it was really unlikely for an ACC team that doesn't win, especially a team in Pitt's standing, to not win the ACC title and make the college football playoff. I think that conversation is a little bit different now, especially with Florida State and Georgia Tech on the schedule. If those teams are able to maybe deliver on some of the hype, that bolsters a resume. If you're able to notch wins against those teams, you maybe don't need to have 11 wins. You can maybe get there with 10 wins. If it's the right combination of wins, I'm not going to throw out the notion that a 9-win ACC team could be on the outskirts of the playoff race as well. So definitely a very different conversation than one that we were having before the season began, and before, especially that Alabama loss to Florida State really kicked everything off. But that's where we're going to wrap things up for this afternoon. Abby has to run. Abby is going to deliver some great volleyball coverage from PPG Paints Arena tonight. Pitt taking on Arizona State at the Paint Can. So Abby will have a bunch of great coverage for you. We will be back later in the week. Abby will have a volleyball podcast. We'll have a game preview for the Central Michigan game coming up this Saturday. Lots of good stuff to come as week 2 gets kicked off. We appreciate you all tuning in, to the PG Pitt Show. We hope you'll come back. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and stay tuned to post-gazette.com for all of our coverage of Pitt football moving forward this season.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.